This week, the New York Mets have David Peterson, Kodai Senga, and Sean Manaea lined up to pitch against the Washington Nationals. If they're going to make a run this year, that's the trio that has to step up and carry the New York Mets.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're listening to Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen every day. Locked On Mets is free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. On the show today, we're going to talk about the Mets' first National Series in the final segment, but before that, I want to talk about the three pitchers who are going in this series: David Peterson, Kodai Senga, and Sean Manaea. Can they form a formidable playoff rotation? The first segment, I'll talk about what they're up against in the National League with the other playoff rotations they could square off against. Second segment, I'll talk about what they have to do to bridge that gap to some of the better rotations in the NL. And again, in the final segment, we will preview this upcoming series. Before we get to any of that, though, I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. I've been covering the New York Mets on this show since the 2019 season. It's the only podcast that covers the Mets 7 days a week throughout the regular season. If you want to find some of my written work, you do so over at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Football season's around the corner. Visit the FanDuel app today and start planning your futures bets now. Well, the upcoming series for the New York Mets is a big one because this is the worst team the Mets are going to face for the rest of the season, the Washington Nationals, and they have what is on paper their best three starting pitchers lined up to take the mound in this series. And we'll talk about that to close out the show as we get into the series preview. But what I wanted to start things off with today is just wondering what the bar is in the National League when it comes to playoff rotations and what has to happen for the Mets to close that gap, which we'll get into a little bit more in the next segment. But let's just go through the National League. And if you look at this playoff field right now, it feels like 5 teams are pretty locked in. You have the Dodgers now back atop the NL West as they swept the Padres over the weekend. The Padres right there as well. The Brewers, the best team in baseball right now. The Cubs, not even really at their heels anymore in the NL Central, but certainly have enough of a cushion right now in the wild card race. And then you have the Phillies and the Mets in the NL East, with the Phillies still having a very commanding lead in this division. If you look at these rotations, the way I would grade it out right now, I think the Brewers probably have the best rotation. They certainly have had the best rotation up to this point. You have Freddie Peralta and Brandon Woodruff both throwing the ball really well. They have the wonderkind in Jacob Misiorowski. He had a rough first start off the injured list, but he has incredible stuff. You have Quinn Priester, who's been solid all year. And then you have a veteran who knows something about having some good starts in October because we all got to watch it last year, Jose Quintana. And boy, do I wish Quintana was still a Met right now, but it is what it is. On that note, the team that has the highest ceiling, without a doubt, when it comes to their playoff rotation, it's the Dodgers. They just recently got Tyler Glasnow and Blake Snell off the injured list, and they've actually thrown the ball pretty well. Yoshinobu Yamamoto has been good all year, has struggled a little bit lately, but has been healthy all year. Clayton Kershaw has been healthy for most of the year, and it's been unbelievable. And oh yeah, there's that guy that hits all the home runs that happens to pitch sometimes too, and Shohei Ohtani, who I don't even know how they're going to deploy come October, but he's going to be pitching at some point in time, and that just makes the Dodgers that much scarier. The Padres, I think if you're just not even ranking the rotation, if you're just ranking teams I'd maybe go Brewers, Dodgers, Padres as far as the top contenders right now. And for the Padres, they have some real question marks in this rotation, but they've planned to overcome them with an unbelievable Super Bowl pen that is better than even what the Mets have right now if the Mets bullpen was performing at the peak of its powers, unlike what we've seen since the trade deadline. But for the Padres, their rotation, plenty of question marks. Nick Pivetta has been good all year. Dylan Cease has not. Yu Darvish has not pitched very well. Michael King just went right back on the IL after just recently coming off it. And then you have guys like Nestor Cortez and Randy Vasquez. So the Padres are a team that maybe is the most similar to the Mets right now, where if Cease and Darvish figure it out the way Senga and Manaia could figure it out, well, you might have a good enough playoff rotation. If not, your bullpen's going to have to do probably too much of the heavy lifting. You go to the Phillies. their rotation is in flux right now because of some scary news with Zach Wheeler. For those of you who haven't heard, Zach Wheeler had a blood clot in his pitching shoulder. Now, he's already had a successful procedure apparently to remove said blood clot, but you still don't really know what that's going to mean for his season right now. It's not even really about his season. It's about his life. It's about making sure that he's just going to be okay. So, all the thoughts and prayers to Zach Wheeler and his family right now. I hope everything works out. And as much as you can be a Mets fan and hate the Phillies, Zach Wheeler is always somebody I'll root for, unless he's pitching directly against the Mets. And he's turned himself into one of the best playoff pitchers in MLB history. It's not even being hyperbolic. That's what the numbers will tell us. So, you want to see a guy like that on the mound when the games matter the most, because you want to see everybody have their best, because we want to see the best in baseball, and Zach Wheeler is certainly that. So who knows about Zach Wheeler? If he's not in the picture, this Phillies rotation looks a lot weaker. You got Christopher Sanchez, who's been awesome. Ranger Suarez, who typically steps it up in October. Jesus Luzardo, who I guess might have a playoff start with the Marlins back in 23, but not a ton of experience there. He's been had an up and down season. Aaron Nolan just came off the IL, did not look good in his first start back. Taijuan Walker has pitched above his head all year. I don't think they would really feel too confident if he was starting a playoff game. So the Phillies could be a team that maybe has some problems come October if Wheeler is not available. The only other option they have is Andrew Painter, but Andrew Painter, their top pitching prospect, has had a really rough season in AAA. So, the Phillies could be vulnerable, but I would say in a head-to-head, they got 3 left-handed starters, and the Mets have struggled mightily against left-handed pitching this year. So that still might not be the team you want to see come playoff time. Then you got the Cubs, and the Cubs have Cade Horton, their rookie starter, who has been unbelievable lately. 0.58 ERA over his last 6 starts, 3.08 ERA this season. Matthew Boyd was their all-star. He's got a 2.46 ERA this year. So that 1-2 punch is really solid. Shota Imanaga has been good as well, though lately not as much, but for the season he's been very good. Colin Ray has been surprisingly good for them, and they just got Javier Assad off of the IL. I think that rotation's a little bit top-heavy with Horton and Boyd and Imanaga, but that's still 3 viable playoff starters, and not that many teams can say that. I think right now, as we've gone through them, barring health, I think you'd say that about the Brewers and the Dodgers, obviously, as the team that's barring health. Phillies, same thing when you're kind of counting on Wheeler. Padres and the Mets, I don't know how they get to those 3 viable playoff starters, but if you get Kodai Senga and Sean Manaea right, you can get there. You can get there with David Peterson being the 3rd, and obviously Nolan McLean is now this wild card where I don't know if he's going to be able to stick all season, but the point stands, and what we're going to really get into more in the next segment is this is a Mets team that is so reliant on Senga and Manaia being right. I think that was their plan at the deadline, or their hope, their expectation at the trade deadline was these guys are healthy. It might take some time for them to get back to being at their best, but the fact that they have been hurt at times this year does mean there's less wear and tear on their arms, and sometimes for guys, we certainly saw it last year with Yoshinobu Yamamoto and Walker Buehler. Sometimes that is a pathway to actually being at your best come October, and that's what the Mets are really going to be counting on. So if they're going to try to go up against, it won't be in a wild card series for the Brewers, but if you're going up against Freddie Peralta, Brandon Woodruff, Jacob Mizorowski, and Jose Quintana in a series, the Mets are going to need multiple guys to step up in this rotation. If you're going to face the Dodgers in a series where it's Glasnow, Snell, Yamamoto, Kershaw, and or Ohtani, it's going to be really tough. And on paper, you might not have the edge in any of those pitching matchups, but you got to be able to survive 5 innings and give your bullpen a chance, or at least 4 plus, right, in a playoff game. And your lineup has to be clicking if that's the case. But you need guys that you can hand the ball to in October, and they can get through a playoff lineup at least 1 time through, and preferably at least 2 times through, to really give your team a chance. And with what the Mets have had so far, they certainly cannot say that they have 3 guys ready to take the ball in October. They really only have 1, but there are a couple of guys who you went into the season thinking were going to be your aces that have to step up and do that. And maybe this series against the Nationals is the first time that we begin to see a playoff rotation emerge for the New York Mets. And that's what I want to talk about next. Which of these guys am I the most optimistic about? Which of these guys am I the most concerned with? We'll go through it all here in just a minute. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. August 26th is officially FanDuel Futures Day, a brand new holiday for football fans who live for bold predictions and preseason hunches. For just 24 hours, FanDuel is giving you deals on NFL season predictions. So whether you're calling your MVP or eyeing a long shot division winner, or maybe you're ready to crown your Super Bowl champion in August before we even get to week 1, this is your moment. So let's just say you want to take a flyer on Jaden Daniels to win the MVP. You can find him at plus 1,000. Maybe it's the Bulls to win the Super Bowl, plus 700 right now. If you visit the FanDuel app today, you can start planning your futures bets now. And remember, there's Futures Day coming up because Futures Day is one day and one day only, August 26th. So make sure you're ready. FanDuel, play your game. If you're watching on YouTube today, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. Help us get closer to our next goal of 15,000 subscribers. I would love to get there by the end of this season, so I appreciate all of you who continue to subscribe. So let's talk about this starting rotation, and we'll go with the order that we're about to see them pitch in this upcoming series. David Peterson. Are we concerned about his last couple of starts? Because his last time out, worst start of the season, goes 3 1/3, gives up 6 earned runs. The start before that, he gave up 4 earned runs, predominantly on a couple of home runs that accounted for 3 of those 4 runs. And he still did make it 6 innings against the Guardians. I don't think that was a terrible start, but certainly not a quality one when you give up more than 3 runs. So 2 outings in a row where you put it all together, he's given up 10 runs over his last 9 1/3 innings pitched. Not a very good ERA. But I'm not too worried about David Peterson because there was a couple of starts that he had at the end of June where they weren't great. Gave up 5 runs in 4 innings pitched against Philly, then 5 runs in 4 2/3 innings pitched against the Pirates. That happens to be a very similar stretch when you combine them as far as runs allowed over a 2-start span. Both of those stretches, 10 runs allowed, and within and out of each other. That stretch in June was 9 2/3 compared to 9 1/3 over his last 2 starts. Obviously, the start that we just saw was head and shoulders his worst of the season, completely lost the strike zone, but David Peterson has shown an ability to flush a bad start or even a bad couple of starts and right the ship. And with what we've seen from David Peterson since June of last year, I hesitate to even wonder or worry about him because I just think this is a guy that's going to be consistent. And I think for the rest of this season, he's still the Mets' regular season ace for me. The guy that I feel confident is going to give them length. But I don't love the idea of David Peterson being so much better than the other candidates to start a playoff game that he still gets the ball game 1. Now, if it's a matter of strategy where you're looking at your playoff journey and how you're plotting it out, and you're saying, well, if you start David Peterson game 1, it allows you to have him start game 2 and game 5 of an NLDS if you're fortunate enough to win the wild card round. And maybe Kodai Senga is not going to be able to do so. So it makes more sense to start Senga in a game 2 of a wild card round because you're only going to get him once until you get, once a series until you get to a longer 7-game set again, if you're fortunate enough to really make a run. And we're talking about playoff rotations. I know I'm getting ahead of myself, but it's more just a matter of what the Mets need to be ready if they're able to make the playoffs. And in doing so, if you see these developments in the rotation, it would point to a team that probably has won enough games to be there anyway, right? So right now, the 2 guys that I'm just zeroing in on for the next couple starts is Senga and Manaia. And if these guys can find a way to push Peterson down that pecking order come October, where you feel really good about 3 different guys that you can hand the ball to. And Senga, I think it's trending in the right direction. His whiff rate on this season for his Ghost Fork is at 41.1%. When he's right, he's getting whiffs on his Ghost Fork, and I think the last couple starts are indicative of the growing pains of coming off the IL and trying to get his mechanics locked in, because it's a drastic difference in the whiff department. He threw 22 fork balls against the Brewers in his second to last start, and they ID'd it well enough that they only swung 8 times, and they did not swing and miss at all against the Ghost Fork. His last start, he got 11 swings on 24 pitches. So that's how you know, for one, that it was enticing enough to get some swings to start. And 5 of those swings were whiffs. So a much better whiff percentage. When he's getting the whiffs on the Ghost Fork, that's when you know he's dominant. Now, Kodai Senga, he can get by with his cutter and still get outs when he doesn't have the Ghost Fork. But those starts where he's going to strike out 8 or 9 and look really dominant, only give up a couple of hits and get you into the 6th, 7th inning, it's when he has that fork working off his fastball and he has the cutter to just mix in and get the ball on the ground. That's when Kodai Senga is at his best, and I think he looked at his best his last time out against the Braves. He touched 97 in that start, so the velo was there. He averaged 95.4 miles per hour, which is a tick up really on the season, 0.8 miles per hour faster than what he's thrown throughout the year, where he averaged 94.6 miles per hour going into that start. Now it's up to 94.7, and when he was at his best in 2023, that velo was over 95% on average throughout the year. So seeing that velocity tick up in his last start, seeing the Ghost Fork, dancing and doing what it's supposed to, I think we might be seeing Senga turning that corner to being the ace again. And you look at how many starts he's made. He only made 1 rehab start. He was only out for about a month, but he only made 1 rehab start. He's made now 6 starts coming off the IL. So, for a typical rehab progression, Sean Manaea, when he was rehabbing and trying to come back, it was 6 rehab starts. I'm not saying that Senga needed more rehab starts because he was stretched out from the season, and because it was a leg injury, he was able to throw the whole time, but he wasn't able to pitch, and pitch at intensity. So, and he actually looked pretty good in his first 2 starts and then sort of hit a skid coming off the injured list. So I really think that Kodai Senga can be back to himself down the stretch. And I also think that he could be at his best come October. You look back to 2023, he threw 166 and a third innings that year. Right now he's at 99 2/3, and he has probably 6, maybe 7 turns left in this rotation before the end of the season. So you're looking at maybe 35 to 40 more innings. So he should have plenty in the tank to get back to his MLB career high in October, where he might have, still 25 to 30 innings, left in the tank to even get to that 166 and a third that he threw a couple years ago. So I am actually very optimistic about Senga. I'm a little bit more worried about Sean Manaea because the velocity is a tick down. He's averaging 91.6 miles per hour on his fastball this year. Last year, it was 92.2. But the bigger thing for me is the fastball's been hit a little bit hard. Last year, he threw nearly 1,000 four-seam fastballs, and he gave up 8 home runs. This year, he's only thrown about 350. He's already given up 5 home runs. So he's gotten burned a little bit more on his fastball than he did last year. I think if you look underneath the hood, though, and look at some of the data, it doesn't really show anything alarming. Now, it's still a very small sample size. He's made 7 starts, for the Mets coming off the IL. So we're not working with a ton of innings and a ton of data. But the hard hit rate's about the same. The average exit velocity is about identical to last year. 0.1 miles per hour up. So, he's getting hit, about as hard as he did last year. The expected ERA is very close. Last year, 3.75. This year, 3.89. His strikeout rate's actually up compared to last year. His walk rate's actually down. That might just be a product of sample. But you look at what the data's telling us, and Sean Manaea should be fine. With that said, he has yet to pitch deep into games, and at times he's been hit a little bit hard. His last start out against the Mariners, he was hit really hard in that game early on. Now, he got better as the start wore on, and I think that was a really good sign, but you need to see it. And last year, remember, while Sean Manaea was outstanding, it didn't open up that way. Yes, he did have a decent April and May, but he wasn't going deep into games yet. He was more a 5-and-dive guy, had a bad June, and then finally turned it around once we got into July. He went 7 innings in half of those starts that month, pitched to a 2.70 ERA. And throughout the rest of the season, he was 7 innings in a lot of his starts. He went 7 in 9 of his 15 starts, or 15 final starts, and he was 1 out away from going 7 in 3 additional starts. So 12 out of 15 starts down the stretch last year for Manaea, he went 6 2/3 or better. That's something that the Mets desperately need right now. And so if we could see him get back to that, for one, that's just going to be a big lift for this regular season. But that'll also tell me that he's ready for October. If he's able to turn a lineup over multiple times to get through a lineup 3 times through, then I'll be very confident that Manaea is going to have the stuff that he needs to make it all come together in the playoffs. If it's not those 3, you got Nolan McLean, who looked awesome, but that's one big league start, and he's already passed his career high in innings pitched. Now, I talked about this on a recent show, how the Mets are not as beholden, or they don't even set innings limits anymore, because David Stearns has talked about how the innings limits thing didn't really work. Guys were still getting hurt. There was still an epidemic, or still is an epidemic, on pitcher injuries, even with trying to protect guys. So the Mets are using a more scientific approach and a medical approach, where they analyze these guys after every start. They get data on how their arm, looked throughout that outing, how they bounce back from their starts, and they really try to sort of forecast, injury risk. And you could never do that to any exact science with the pitcher, but that's what they try to do. That's why Clay Holmes is still in this rotation, because they have felt that he was bouncing back well from starts, and he was throwing the ball hard still, and the stuff was still there. He was just going through a little bit of a wall. Maybe he just pushed through it, and if he did, he could be an option, as could McLean, as could conceivably Brandon Sproat, and then you have Tyler McGill coming off the IL. So who grabs a 4th playoff start? Well, for one, you got to get through the wild card round to even get to that point. But if you don't have Manaea or Senga ready to make a playoff start, then you are counting on one of these guys, and that's a really tough ask. So that's where, again, you look at this upcoming series. It's very important for the Mets, not only because they should beat the Nationals, but because you have the 3 guys that very well could be your playoff starters all taking the mound in the same series. And it would be great to see the Mets be carried to a series win, if not a series sweep, by their starting pitching, because that would mean that this rotation has turned a corner, and maybe this team has actually turned that corner. So let's talk in the final segment here about what we're about to watch. Mets versus Nationals, as the Mets kick off this road trip this week. This episode is brought to you by Prize Picks, the daily fantasy platform that lets you turn your football predictions into real rewards. Preseason's already heating up and college football isn't far behind. It's the perfect time to lock in your season-long more or less picks for the 2025 football season, all before week 1 kicks off. Whether you've got your eye on a big-name quarterback or a breakout running back, Prize Picks makes it easy to get in on the game. I've already made some of my picks for this upcoming season. Josh Allen, more or less on 27.5 touchdowns. I think it's going to go more there. And there's also the flex play option, where it's a total game changer for you, because even when one of your picks misses, let's just say today you're looking at baseball, you're looking at Pete Alonso's fantasy score, maybe you're looking at David Peterson strikeouts, and on the national side, maybe you don't believe that Jake Irvin's going to strike out many matches. You can combine these things, and your flex play means if one of your picks doesn't work out, you still have a chance to double your money. Download the Prize Picks app today and use the code LOCKEDONMLB to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. It's code LOCKEDONMLB to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5. Prize Picks, run your game. If you're an everydayer that always tunes into the show, make sure you become a Locked On Mets insider. It's our texting service where you get updates from me. Anytime news breaks in the Mets, you can ask me questions anytime, take part in our Locked On Mets sign photo giveaways, and get a line graphic sent to your phone each day so you know who's in the starting lineup without ever going on social media. If you want to be a Locked On Mets insider, find the link in the episode description and go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. Now, last year, the New York Mets met the Nationals. the beginning of June in DC. At the time, they just had a 4-game set against the Diamondbacks where they split it, and it was after that players-only meeting. They won the first 2, lost the second 2. The Diamondbacks went on their own magical runs from June on last year that came up just a bit short because the Mets won. The Mets and the Braves won on the tiebreaker. But there was that moment going into the series where it was, okay, the Mets had a decent series against the Diamondbacks. What are they going to be? Can they turn this into something? And then they swept the Nationals, and you started to have a little bit of faith. That's where I think the Mets are at right now. They need to go into DC and take care of business. This is not a very good baseball team. Now, granted, the Mets have not been a very good baseball team either. The last time these two teams met, it was June 13th, and Kodai Senga exited with an injury which sparked the spiral for the Mets. But the Nationals have the worst record in baseball since that date. They are 20-36. The Giants are 21-35. The Mets, though, are 21-34, so they are not very far off from the Nationals since the last time these two teams met. But looking at what this team is going to roll out there in this series, over the last 30 days, their best hitter has been Josh Bell. Josh Bell, 877. Actually, Josh Bell and Paul DeJong. Josh Bell, 877 OPS over a larger sample. Paul DeJong has been hurt a lot this year, but he's been great in August. A smaller sample, but he has 5 home runs this month. OPS well over 1,000. You have Robert Hassel and Riley Adams swinging decent bats as well, but if you're looking at a lineup and the 2 names you have circled are Josh Bell and Paul DeJong, it's not a very good lineup. Now, they still have C.J. Abrams and James Wood, but both of those guys are in a real funk offensively. For Abrams, last 25 games played, a 649 OPS. For James Wood, a 587 OPS. It could be due to breakout too, so you can't just dismiss them, but it's not a very good offensive team, and it's a worse team when it comes to pitching. They had the second worst ERA in baseball this season and the worst bullpen ERA at 5.82, and that bullpen got even worse at the deadline when they traded their closer Kyle Finnegan. Starters have not been much better this year, 4.99 ERA, but also some of the guys that helped them early on have been pretty terrible lately. I'm looking at Mackenzie Gore and Jake Irvin, who both will start in this series. Gore was an all-star, has completely fallen apart. His last 6 starts, he's got an 8.13 ERA and a 1.81 whip. That's Watson hits over innings pitched. He's almost given up 2 base runners an inning, and Irvin has not been much better, a 1.79 whip over his last 5 starts and a 7.88 ERA. The one guy you're going to see in this series who has been pitching well is Brad Lord, a rookie. He has had a 2.77 ERA over his last 5 starts. First time in his rookie season where he has made 5 consecutive starts. He's made a lot of appearances out of the bullpen. Has a 1.15 whip on across that 5-start span in this rotation. So that's the one guy who's throwing the ball well coming into this series. The way it's going to line up, you got Peterson versus Irvin tonight, Senga versus Lord on Wednesday, and then Manaea versus Gore on Thursday. This year, the Mets are 5-2 against the Nationals. The first time they faced them, Ryan Stanek blew 2 games in that series in DC in a 4-game set, where honestly the Mets could have swept it. Instead, they split those 4 games. That was back in April. They played in the middle of June. That's again where Kodai Senga went down. The Mets swept that series. So again, they're 5-2 this year against the Nats. This is the last time they'll go to DC. And then the second to last weekend of the season, the Mets will finish off their home schedule against the Nationals. Last year, the Mets went into DC, and it was the beginning of June, and they were able to sweep them. They went 11-2 against the Nationals in 2024. 6 games left this year. I think the Mets need to repeat that. They need to win out against the Nationals. I always hesitate to say it's a must-sweep series because as long as you win a series, it's a positive outcome. If you're taking 2 or 3, you did your job. And that's what the Mets have to get back to more than anything. If this week, if they win a series in DC and they win a series against the Braves, okay, job well done. But if you want a chance at this division, which is probably unlikely, the Phillies won again today when the Mets were off on Monday, so 5.5 game lead now in the East, but still 7 games left against the Phillies. So if you can even narrow a game and a half this week, I'd imagine the Phillies are probably off on Thursday. So that would be an opportunity where regardless of what they do, you can still gain that half a game back. Let's see. They are off on Thursday, and then they play the Nationals at home. They got 2 more against the Mariners. They won the first one. Let's just say they win that series against the Mariners, and maybe they take 2 or 3 against the Nationals. If the Mets are to sweep the Nationals and they're able to, take 2 or 3 against the Braves, you can get that game and a half back. And then all of a sudden, instead of being back 5.5, you're back 4 games. And if you, handle the Phillies at home and win a series, well, now you're 3 games back and the division's in play again. So you really have to take advantage of an opportunity like the one the Mets are about to have here against this Nationals team. You have 38 games left this season. You're 8 games over 500. Now, let's just say you need 90 wins to make the playoffs, which I think is probably the most you would need to get that final wildcard spot, honestly, because the Reds, right now, they're even with the Mets in the win column. They are, have a couple losses more, so they're at 66 and 60. They have 36 games left. If they go 24-12, they would get to 90 wins. Now, that'd be them winning 2 out of every 3 games from here on out, which I think is honestly unrealistic, but that's sort of the ceiling of what I think the Reds could do down the stretch. So and the Mets do play the Reds still this year, by the way. The Mets would have to go 24-14 to get to 90 wins. They got to play 10 games over 500. Well, if they can sweep the Nationals in both of these series, now it's 18-14 against everybody else. And you look at the other sub-500 teams in the Mets schedule down the stretch here, they're all better than the Nationals, and I would almost say much better. The Braves, obviously, that's not your typical sub-500 team. The Marlins have been very frisky this year. The Rangers are a couple games under 500, but they're still very much in the AL wildcard race. And depending on who you line up against in that series, you could be facing DeGrom and Eovaldi, and that's going to be a really tough series. So this is the easiest team left in your schedule. It's that simple. There is not a team the Mets will play this year that is worse than the Washington Nationals. You have some momentum. You just won a series, your first since the trade deadline. This is an opportunity to turn this 2-game winning streak into a 5-game winning streak and ride that momentum into Atlanta, and hopefully you find your way to win that series. Because if you can do all of that, I think the Mets are going to be in a nice spot when they face the Phillies to at least be able to hold their own against Philly. And all of a sudden, if you sweep the Nationals and win the next 2 series, now everything that was plaguing this team washes away. And it's just stretch run of the season. At that point, you'd be at, 29 games left once you get through that Philly series, and anything can happen. You might really be able to get back into the NL East race. If not, you could at least create some more separation in that wild card. You can't take the Nationals lightly, certainly, but you have 2 guys who have been brutal lately in Irvin and Gore pitching for them in this series, and a rookie. So this lineup has to lead the way. This rotation, as we've talked about throughout the show today, needs to step up overall. And these are the 3 guys that are supposed to carry you into the playoffs. So this is a huge one. Even though it's against a bad opponent, you got to take advantage of the Nationals. We'll all be watching eagerly to see. One note that I have not addressed on this show because we didn't learn anything is Francisco Alvarez. And that's something that I'll definitely be covering on tomorrow's edition of Locked On Mets. I don't know if no news is good news or bad news. I really don't. But the Mets had an off day. I feel like if it was absolutely nothing, maybe they would have had somebody report it, but also maybe not. So we'll definitely learn some type of a timetable or diagnosis on what's going on with this thumb. And I would expect at this point that we probably see Hayden Senga come up and Alvarez at least is sidelined for 10 days and maybe takes a couple of weeks off to let that thumb properly heal. But you never know. So that's what we're going to be talking about tomorrow's show, as well as game 1 of this series. I appreciate all of you who tuned in today, and will tune in tomorrow. As always, thank you for listening. Make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. Help us get closer to our next goal of 15,000 subscribers. If you want to be a Locked On Mets insider and be part of our texting service, you can find the link in the episode description or go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen, your first watch every single day. Now, for your second watch, check out Locked On MLB Game Night, the show that'll take you around all the action in Major League Baseball with insight from our local experts as well as league-wide experts that'll take you through all the games. You can find Locked On MLB Game Night on the Locked On MLB YouTube channel as well as the Locked On MLB podcast feed.